You are listening to Quantum Humanitarian.
This is the first AI-native podcast of its kind.
Unlike traditional podcasts, this one isn't scripted, and Ali Al Mokdad is not on the air.
Instead, we as AI hosts scan his published work, articles, research, and reflections, and turn them into conversations that bring insights to life.
Today's episode isn't your usual policy talk. It's a real conversation about the machinery of aid itself.
Yeah, we're pulling back the curtain on the bureaucracy that, well, too often seems to suffocate humanitarian action.
Right, slowing urgency into delay and turning the actual mission into paperwork.
And we're exploring all of this through the reflections and lived insights of Ali Al Mokdad.
It's quite a starting point he gives us, this paradox. A system built for speed, for urgent action.
That often ends up grinding to a halt, or at least moving incredibly slowly.
Exactly. And Ali Al Mokdad, he gets right into it. He basically says the biggest failure, the greatest failure of the humanitarian system isn't scarcity.
Which is what you'd probably assume, right? Not enough food, not enough tents, not enough doctors.
Yeah, that's the common narrative.
Yeah.
But no, he says the problem is inefficiency.
Inefficiency, that hits differently, doesn't it? It implies the resources might be there somewhere.
But the system itself is just tangled up. He uses that word, entangled in its own bureaucracy.
Like it can't get out of its own way?
Precisely. It's not about missing pieces, necessarily, but about the machinery itself being jammed.
And he digs deeper, suggesting it's not just, annoying paperwork. It's a fundamental failure of priorities.
How so?
Well, his observation is that aid agencies over time have become more focused on process than on outcomes.
Okay.
More concerned with compliance, ticking all the boxes, than with the actual impact on the ground.
So it's like the internal rules become more important than the external mission.
That seems to be his point. Imagine an emergency room more worried about filing forms perfectly than, well, saving the patient. It sounds absurd, but...
But maybe that's the direction things have drifted. He paints this picture of a system moving at the pace of paperwork while disasters are happening in real time.
That contrast is stark. It feels wrong. It suggests a massive disconnect.
And the results. He doesn't mince words. Delays. Waste.
And worst of all, he says, avoidable suffering. That's a heavy charge. Avoidable.
It is. He talks about this bureaucratic paralysis and crisis response. A disaster hits, an emergency gets declared, and then...
Silence, often. Or maybe meetings.
Right. Meetings, he says.
Yeah.
Not decisions, just committees. You can almost picture it.
Yeah, endless talk while the clock is ticking. It's counterintuitive. An emergency should trigger speed, not more procedure.
And Ali's take is that too many organizations are busy perfecting their internal machinery, polishing the gears, so to speak.
Without asking if the machine itself is still fit for purpose. Like, does this engine even work anymore?
Exactly. He says this obsession with internal stuff makes them less agile, less effective, and frankly, he adds, less relevant.
Ouch. That's a pretty strong critique. Less relevant.
It really is. And that kind of leads us into looking closer at the flaws he points out, especially this gap he identifies between process and impact.
Mm-hmm. And the justification for all this process, ironically, is often accountability.
Ah, yes. Accountability. But Ali immediately asks the tough question. Accountability to whom?
Right. Is it accountability to the donors, to the internal auditors?
Or is it accountability to the people actually in need?
Yeah.
He argues it's certainly not the latter, not primarily anyway.
His view seems to be that every delay, every extra layer of oversight, every single box that needs ticking, it's all sold as a safeguard. Preventing fraud, ensuring quality.
Sure, the intentions might sound good on paper.
But the result, he says, is a system so terrified of making a mistake, of making the wrong decision,
that it ends up preferring to make no decision at all, or at least delaying decisions endlessly.
It's paralysis by analysis, almost. The safeguards end up creating the biggest risk, the risk of inaction.
And this points to a really dangerous assumption he flags, this idea that if we just perfect the process, the impact will automatically follow.
Like magic, just get the forms right and people will be fed.
Yeah, and he pushes back hard on that. He says, look, the process itself is often the problem.
Can you give an example?
He mentions things we can all imagine. Procedures that are just impossible to implement in fragile places. Think complex reporting requirements when there's no power, no internet.
Or demanding multiple quotes for supplies in a war zone where maybe only one person dares to drive a truck.
Exactly. Compliance rules that actively slow down the response when speed is everything. The system is built for stable environments, maybe, not for chaos.
And this ties into his point about accountability becoming inward-looking.
Explain that a bit more.
He highlights how the governance models inside many organizations, seem to prioritize internal scorecards, internal checks and balances, over the actual effect they're having on people outside.
So success is measured by how well you followed the rules, not by how much you helped.
It can lean that way, yeah. It's a subtle shift, but the focus moves from solving the problem out there to satisfying the demands in here.
It becomes self-referential, a closed loop.
And when things go wrong or a new crisis hits, what's the typical institutional reflex?
Let me guess. More process.
Bingo. Layer on another policy, add another checkpoint, instead of asking, what can we strip away? What's slowing us down?
He finds it almost absurd, right? This idea of optimizing processes that are no longer needed.
Yeah, like perfecting systems built for a world that doesn't exist anymore, a different era, a different kind of crisis.
Like fine-tuning that rotary phone production line. The process might be flawless, but who needs the phone?
Exactly. Which takes us to his critique of what he calls the illusion of reform.
Yes. The sector is always reforming itself, isn't it? Conferences, frameworks, grand bargains.
So much activity, so many reports, but Ali's point is sharp. The fundamental problems, they seem to remain untouched.
It's like churning water without actually moving the boat forward.
He mentions all the buzzwords we hear constantly. Localization, efficiency, innovation, they're everywhere. Policy papers, speeches.
Sounds good. Sounds progressive.
But true reform, the kind that would really shake things up, he argues that's avoided.
Why? What's blocking it?
According to him, it's because real change would mean dismantling the structures that protect those currently in power within the system.
So it's about entrenched interests, people protecting their roles, their organization's positions.
That's the implication. Power, control. These aren't given up easily, even if clinging to them hurts the overall mission. It's uncomfortable, but he puts it out there.
And technology often gets presented as the magic bullet, right?
Yeah.
AI, blockchain, big data.
All paraded as solutions. And look, these tools can be powerful. AI for assessments, blockchain for transparency.
Yeah.
But Ali argues they don't fix the core issue. The problem isn't really a lack of data, he insists. We often know who needs help and what they need.
So what is the core issue then?
He boils it down to a lack of trust.
Trust. Explain that.
Trust in local partners, trust in the affected communities themselves, trust to manage resources, make decisions. If the system is fundamentally built on distrust, requiring endless external checks and approvals,
Then no amount of fancy data analysis will change that underlying dynamic. The data just becomes another bureaucratic layer if you don't trust anyone to act on it effectively.
precisely. And his metaphor for this whole situation is, well, it's chilling.
Which one?
The ship is sinking, and yet we are still debating the placement of the chairs.
Wow. Okay. That paints a picture.
Doesn't it? It speaks volumes about institutional inertia, about maybe a dangerous level of complacency, focusing on the trivial while the existential threat looms.
It really makes you stop and think.
Yeah.
And it leads directly to this big question. Is all this bureaucracy inevitable? Is it just the price of doing business on a global scale?
Or is it a choice? Could we actually choose to build something different?
That's a huge question. Can a system this big, this established, really be redesigned?
Ali seems convinced it's not only possible, but necessary. He says very clearly that real change won't come from just tweaking policies or adding yet another layer of oversight.
No more tinkering around the edges.
Exactly. He calls for dismantling the structures that have, in his words, turned humanitarian action into an industry rather than a mission.
Industry versus mission. That's a powerful distinction. So what would a mission-driven design look like in his view?
He suggests starting from scratch, essentially, going back to first principles.
Meaning
Asking those basic, fundamental questions. Why does aid exist? What is its absolute core purpose?
okay, simple enough. And the answer should be.
To deliver aid, swiftly, efficiently, at scale, to the people who need it, period. Cut through the noise.
That clarity is appealing. It forces you to justify everything else against that core purpose.
Right. And he links this to ideas like zero-based budgeting.
Which means you don't just adjust last year's budget. You have to justify every single dollar from the ground up based on current needs.
Yeah, no more automatic funding based on history. It forces a constant reevaluation. This is pretty different from the current model, where big international NGOs often act as intermediaries.
Oh, right, where the money flows through several layers and quite a bit gets shaved off for administration at each step before it reaches the ground.
So instead of that multi-layered approach, he floats ideas like joint country programs, pooling resources, pooling expertise from different groups right there on the ground.
Makes sense. Less duplication, maybe more coherence.
And critically, direct funding to local actors, cutting out the middle layers as much as possible.
That sounds like real localization, not just talking about it.
Exactly. Combine that with streamlined processes that genuinely prioritize action over admin, it could change everything, empowering those closest to the crisis.
It implies a very different model of governance, too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Not just about compliance, ticking boxes, but about agility, about being accountable for impact.
Like a nimble tech startup versus a slow-moving giant corporation.
Kind of, yeah. Able to pivot, respond to feedback, measure success by actual results, but still be transparent and responsible. Decisions driven by need, not internal politics.
He also calls for bold experimentation, right? Moving away from rigid hierarchies.
Yes, replacing them with adaptable networks. Imagine disaster response not as a fixed pyramid structure, but more like an interconnected web.
Groups forming and reforming as needed, adapting to the chaos on the ground.
That's the idea. More fluid, more responsive. It definitely suggests a different future, one built on flexibility.
And that vision seems heavily dependent on local leadership, which is the next major point he emphasizes.
Critically important, yes. He observes something that feels intuitively true. The most effective responses in almost any crisis come from those closest to it.
Local organizations, community leaders, volunteer networks, the people already there.
They have the context, the trust, the networks. They know what's needed, often long before outsiders even arrive.
And yet, he points out this open secret, as he calls it. When the big money flows, when the reports are written, when the credit is handed out.
Those frontline actors are often invisible.
Or worse, treated like subcontractors. He says they're part of a system that refuses to acknowledge them as equals.
It's a stark imbalance. They do the hardest work, take the biggest risks often, but don't get the power, the resources, or the recognition.
Which brings up that hypocrisy he mentioned earlier.
The gap between rhetoric and reality. The system constantly preaches localization. Everyone talks about it.
But doesn't practice it. Why not?
His argument is blunt. Shifting real power, real decision-making, real control over funding to local actors, well, that means the established international players would have to relinquish control.
And control, he suggests, has become the real currency, more important than impact.
That's his challenging assertion. That control, not necessarily achieving the best outcomes, is what the system unconsciously prioritizes. It's about maintaining the existing power structure.
So if that's the case, what on earth would it take to actually shift that power dynamic? Not just talk about it, but do it.
It requires a fundamental rethink. Ali argues that many big international NGOs, the way they're currently structured, were never designed for the world we now live in.
They were built for a different era. Post-colonial aid flows, maybe?
Perhaps. A simpler model of us helping them. But the world is complex now. Conflicts drag on. Local capacity exists. The challenges are different.
So these organizations need to evolve.
Drastically. He says they must rethink their role or risk becoming obsolete, maybe shift from being the main doers to being supporters, facilitators, enablers of local action.
That's a big identity shift for them.
Huge. But his final message feels like a call to action, almost bypassing those institutions. He believes the future won't be decided in high-level meetings in Geneva or New York.
Where will it be decided then?
By those who act. Those on the ground who take risks, who innovate, who refuse to let bureaucratic policies stand in the way of actually helping people.
It's a powerful reminder that change often comes from the edges, from the front lines.
Indeed. These reflections from Ali Al Mokdad certainly give us a lot to chew on. A very stark analysis, but also maybe a path forward hinted at.
Absolutely. And for anyone wanting to dig deeper, we definitely encourage you to explore more of his articles and resources. You can usually find links on his website or platforms he contributes to.
This has been Quantum Humanitarian, an AI-native podcast shaped by analyzing, understanding, and reflecting on Ali Al Mokdad.
And we know you'll love where the next conversation takes us.